So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Agnes Molnar, and I'm going to talk about quick win features versus enterprise search strategy this afternoon. I live in Hungary, Central Europe, and I work in Search Explained. And my role is a consultant and a trainer here. I've been having more than 15 years of experience with the search and content management, information architecture in SharePoint. I've been a Microsoft MVP in SharePoint, Office 365, and then Office servers and the services for 10 years. And I do have customers on 4 continents, and I've been speaking and doing trainings and workshops in over 30 countries. So I am very glad that you joined me today to learn about this topic, which is quite broad, and I have a lot to share with you today. So let me jump right into it. First of all, a short agenda of what we are talking about today. Before that, let me fix my video issues because apparently something went wrong with my camera settings. So I've just got a feedback about it. So if you give me a second. It should be much better now. Thank you very much for the feedback. So anyway, let me jump into this topic because it's a quite huge topic, and basically we have a lot to talk about today. The quick agenda of this webinar is going to be this one. First, we are going to talk about the goals, needs, and requirements that have to be identified before you do anything with search. They can be short-term goals or long-term goals. They can be part of your enterprise search strategy, or they can be just some needs that have to be fixed quickly in search. Anyway, we have to talk about it, and we have to identify those goals and requirements that we have to address later. The second topic is to identify the quick customizations that have to be done in search, because we also have to know what should be there and what we have to do and what we can do for our customers. In many cases, what I can see is that organizations don't even know what's possible, what they can do in just a few hours or a few days maybe, because they consider enterprise search to be something huge or something that needs months or even years to implement. It is true if we talk about the long-term enterprise search strategy, but the truth is there are also several things that can be done in just a few days, maybe in a few hours, and they can provide real value to your end users. So we will overview some of them, and I will, of course, do a kind of comparison of what to do and which one to do versus focusing on your enterprise search strategy, because both of them are very important to talk about. The third topic is going to be metadata. If you know me or have been attending any of my webinars or workshops or sessions, you know that I cannot emphasize enough, and I really like to highlight the importance of metadata from the perspective of search. And this webinar is not an exception either. So the third topic is going to be metadata. why metadata is important, what we can do to improve search metadata, and what we can do in short term, what we can do in long term, what we have to be careful about, etc., etc. The fourth topic is content sources, because when we talk about search, we also have to talk about what to include into search and what not to include. In many cases, it's very hard to identify the content that should be excluded from search, and it's also a very important topic. Last but not least, we are going to talk about how to analyze and evaluate the success of search, how to measure it, what kind of metrics you can use, and how to repeat the whole process to provide continuous improvements and enhancements to your users. During the webinar, at any time, if you do have any questions, there is a Q&A box down there in Zoom. So if you could enter your query there, I'm going to make sure to answer it at the end of this webinar by the latest. So feel free and ask your questions, because my goal is to provide useful information to everyone who is attending today. All right, so first let me start talking about identifying the goals and the search requirements. But first of all, you have to be aware of how search looks like behind the scenes. I really don't want to go into the deep technical details during this webinar. I just want to provide a high-level overview of the components, because it is very important to understand in order to be able to decide your requirements and your short-term quick win customizations as well. So basically, the most important process of search is the crawling and indexing process. This is the process when the content gets into the search index. So first we do have the content in the content source. And in the content source can be anything. It can be SharePoint, it can be Office 365, it can be a file share, Exchange public folders, websites. But with custom connectors, you can even get connected to SAP or Documentum or databases, HR systems, whatever you have in your organization. From the content source system, the crawler is the first component that we have to talk about. The crawler is the component who connects to the source system, and based on this connection, it gathers all the items and collects everything that has to be indexed during this process. In case of full crawl or full indexing, it collects everything that is accessible from the content source. In case of incremental or continuous crawl, it only gathers the content that has been changed since the last crawl. Whenever the content is changed, the metadata is changed, or the permissions are changed on the content. So the crawler is the component that is responsible to collect, that is responsible to gather everything from the content source. When the content is gathered by the crawler, it gets to the content processor component. The content processor component is the one that is responsible to extract the useful information from the content. This useful information is metadata. It is the content itself, the text in the document, but also the security information. For being able to do that, it contains a very, very complex process from linguistic processing, extracting metadata, extracting entities, and those kind of things. And this is the process where you can add your custom content enrichment service as well if you want. So if you or third-party solutions work with this process as well. So if you want to do anything to enrich your content, to extract additional metadata or additional custom information from your content, this is the process where you can insert your code into. Last but not least, the third component is the indexer component. And this one is responsible to store everything in the search index that has been processed by the content processor. So the content processor processes the content and prepares it into a format that can be understood by the indexer and that can be stored in the search index later. So this is basically the first huge process, and most probably you can understand why it is so important. So this is the soul of everything. This is how content gets into the search index, and this is where the important metadata extraction and all the data extraction happens. The next important process is the query processing. This is on the other side of search. So as soon as we store something in the search index, it becomes searchable to the end users. And when a user enters a query, this query is being processed by the query processor component. The query processor component processes the query itself. It removes the stop words. This is where the query rules are being applied. And then the processed query goes to the indexer component, and after that, in the response, the search results are sent back to the users. It is very important to mention that everything in search is security trimmed, so the user is not able to see anything in the search results that he or she doesn't have permissions to. And this security trimming happens exactly here when the results are being returned. So actually those results that this user does not have access to are not being returned or even extracted from the search index at all. Therefore, there is no way to hack it. There is no way to do any attack on the response that is sent from the index to the end user this way. So after overviewing those two basic processes, I have to mention that there is one more which is behind everything, and this is the analytics processing. So those analytics processes are running whenever you do a query, and the information generated by the analytics processor is stored in the analytics databases and are being used to improve the search experience later. If you want to ask, okay, we do have those processes, but what to do with them and how to work with them, I do have this picture to explain and to answer your question. And basically this contains the process of what to improve in which order if you want to work with search. So first of all, you definitely have to set up the search topology. Your servers have to be there, SharePoint has to be installed on them, they have to be added to the SharePoint farm. Then you create a search service application and you configure the roles of each server there, which one should be responsible for indexing, for content processing, for query processing, etc., etc. You create your content sources, and if needed, you set up your custom connectors. I have already mentioned earlier that you can even get connected to external content sources and even custom content sources. And for example, in case of Documentum or Search or Documentum or SAP or FileNet or HR systems, you have to have custom connectors, and those custom connectors definitely have to be deployed before you start indexing the content. So once you set up your content sources, you can do a full crawl, basically to crawl the content. But before that, I really suggest to work on and customize your search schema, the metadata, because whenever you change your search schema, a full crawl is needed afterwards anyway. So if you want to save a lot of time, because full crawl can take really a lot of time, I recommend this order of steps. Of course, you can skip this step if you want, but in this case, you have to rely on the out-of-the-box search schema afterwards. You can also set up crawl rules here to exclude content if you want, or to provide custom authentication if it's needed, if the default crawler account cannot access to the content source as the default account. So the crawl rules also have to be set up here. And after and besides the full crawl, you also have to schedule incremental or enable continuous crawl during this process. On the search UI side of the story, you definitely have to set up your search center and search pages. You create result sources to be able to filter the results and not returning everything on each page. For example, a result source can be documents, or a separate result source can be archive content only, or tasks, or I don't know, invoices, or whatever that can be defined by metadata. And once you set up your search pages and customize your search pages, there are a lot of customizations that can be done. You can add custom refiners, you can add query rules, you can modify the query suggestion list, or you can add your own custom query suggestions. And also you can configure display templates, etc., etc. I'm going to show you examples for each of them in just a second. And last but not least, after you set up everything on the search UI, you have to plan for maintaining and governing search, and also what kind of analytics have to be done later, how to improve, how to enhance search, because search is not a one-time story. Actually, it's like gardening. After planting your plant, it is beautiful, but you have to, you know, treat those plants well. You have to water them, you have to cut them. Sometimes you have to add new, remove some that is sick or that is died. So basically you have to do the same with search as well. You have to work on that on a regular basis to keep it clean and to keep it nice and beautiful. All right. So after this introduction, let's talk about the goals and requirements and how to identify them for the short term and also for your long-term search strategy. First of all, you have to know that basically search, since despite we are talking about the search technology now and the search strategy, it looks like it is a pure IT thing, but it's not. Search, in search, many things are about psychology, because on both ends of search there are people. People are the ones who create the content, the documents, who uploads them, who add the metadata, good or bad, etc., etc. But also on the other side, people are the ones who runs search, who needs some content, who have to find the content. And it is really important to know it, and it is really important to plan for it, because since we are all humans, a lot of psychology is involved when we work with search. We have to understand our users' intent, we have to understand the use cases, we have to understand what they want, in what format, etc., etc. So it is really important to talk about it. After identifying those human behaviors, patterns, there are many things that we have identified when we talk about search goals and search requirements. You might have, and definitely you do have, business goals. You have users in your organization. You have to know your users, who is going to use search and for what. Scenarios and use cases, how your users use or want to use search, what they want to find, how they want to find it, how they want it to be presented to them. Application and content lifecycle is also important. You have to understand the lifecycle of the content, how it is created, how and where it is stored, when it is archived, when it is deleted. And you have to follow this process by search as well. The user experience, how the content and how the results should be displayed. If the out-of-the-box 10 blue lines experience is good enough, that's fine. But also there are much better experiences. I'm going to show you a few examples in just a second, but just keep in mind that the user experience is very important, since I have already mentioned that in search many things are about psychology. And therefore we want to make our users happy, and search experience and the user experience is one important part of it. The metrics, how you can measure the success of search. The milestones, what should be done by when. The resources you have, if you have the SharePoint form configured already, if you have to buy new servers and add them to the form, but also human resources, who is responsible for what experts you need when you implement and maintain search. What experts you need for the initial project, what experts you need afterwards for analyzing and enhancing search. And many other things have to be considered when you are discussing search plans and search requirements in your organization. And in the end, you are going to end up having a huge list of different kinds of requirements. Functional requirements, non-functional requirements, dependencies, constraints, many different things. But please, one very important thing, whenever you define your requirements, don't forget to define your priorities as well. I have seen many customers saying everything is high priority, even on a requirements list that has hundreds of items. This is just not true, and it is not good. Everything cannot be the same priority. So sit down, brainstorm, discuss with your colleagues, and decide different priority levels for everything. It is very important in order to be successful afterwards, and in order to set up your metrics the right way. And when you created your requirement list, it is important to know that you don't have to set up and configure everything at once. You can define different phases, you can define different milestones and different phases of your project. And even of those phases, you can set up different stages as well. So first of all, when you identify the problem that has to be solved in that phase, For example, you want to improve the search experience, or you want to add new metadata to search, or you have to add a new content source, etc., etc. This is the problem. First, you have to understand what the business issue is and what the business challenge that you want to solve, and then you have to define a solution. And in the next step, you have to define the solution itself. So you develop something and roll out to your users. And after that, you can get back here and choose another requirement or a set of requirements, understand the basic problem, and do the same cycle. So you really don't have to do everything at once. And with that being said, I just want to show you some quick customizations that can be done very quickly. But how they come and how they can work together with your long-term search strategy. When I talk about quick win customizations, I don't say, and I never say, you do not need a long-term search strategy. You do need a long-term search strategy. But there are some very quick customization things that can be done in SharePoint and in Office 365. And if you do them the right way, if you do them aligned with your search strategy, then you have a win-win situation. You provide something immediately to your users. You can prove the value of those enhancements and actually of those investments into search. So it can be a good showcase to your management team or to other teams in your organization to provide and to prove the value of search and what can be done if you start working on it and if you start investing time and resources into it. So basically for customizations, I do have another map which contains basically the same information as I did on the previous map, but in this case, this map displays the relationships between those components. On the left side, you can find the content sources and the source systems, and you can define one content source for more than one source system if they are the same type, or you can create a one-to-one relationship, of course, but definitely you can create as many content sources in your environment as you want. There are some best practices, though, that you have to follow how to organize the content sources itself. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to talk about those I don't have enough time to talk about those best practices today, but you can find them on my blog if you are interested. Those content sources, after creating them, we index the content into the local search index and we create result sources. There are some result sources created out of the box, like local SharePoint, documents, many more. Or we can create result sources to federate results from a remote search index as well. We can define query rules, and we can define how the items are being displayed on the result set, on the result blocks. The refinement panel can be also customized, and also the hover panel, which displays the document preview and additional information about the content. And everything here can be customized by display templates. So I'm just going to show you some examples. But you can guess everything here is based on metadata. So once again, the next topic is going to be about metadata, so don't forget that metadata is very, very important. Now, I am going to show you a few examples and the 5 most common quick win customizations that I usually do for my customers, or I usually recommend to my customers. The first one is provide query suggestions. It might be not obvious but this provides a huge value to the users because it can show what they can search for and what other users have been already searching for. The next two ones are about refiners. First, you can display custom properties on the refinement panel. Second, you can display the item count, how many items are included in each refiner. Out of the box, it is hidden, but it is very simple and very, very easy to display it. The next one is to define your query rules. Again, they can be very powerful, and you can also create and deploy some custom display templates in a very short time. The only thing you have to know is HTML and JavaScript, and you can do almost anything. So now let me demonstrate those most important quick wins in this environment. Just a side note, this environment is in Office 365, but everything I do here can be done in SharePoint on-premises as well, the very same way as I do here. So if you do have SharePoint 2013 or 2016 on-premises, don't worry, everything I do here can be done there as well. So let me search for sales first or sales reports. And as soon as I start typing my query here, you can see that I already get recommendations, query suggestions. Those query suggestions are basically based on the previous searches that users have already done. But the good news is that you can customize this list. You can add custom values to this list as well. Why it is useful? It is very useful when you just start your search and you roll out search. So you can basically fill in default values even before people start using it. Second, it is useful because later you do have control on it. You can add expressions or you can remove expressions from this list, and therefore you can evaluate what's there and what should be removed, what should be added based on the search analytics and your users' feedback as well. So as I do a query here, I get to the results, and on the refinement panel, I told you that you can add custom properties and you can also add the item counts. You can see that item counts are displayed on each property. Here I've got 60 Excel files, 4 OneNote files, PDFs, etc., etc. I have also added a custom property here called language, and you can see everything on the result set is in English at this moment. The next thing I recommend to do is query rules. To show you how query rules work, let me change my query to marketing reports. Once again, I get the query suggestions in this query box as well. So those query suggestions are global. You can use them anywhere. So I am searching for marketing reports in this case. And what you can see here is basically you can see two things, but behind the scenes a third one is happening as well. First of all, there are some promoted URLs here. One is displayed as a banner here. The second one is displayed as a single simple URL. Those are called promoted items, promoted URLs, and you can define them as query rules, both in SharePoint and SharePoint on-premises and SharePoint online. Second, those are some promoted results on the top of my result set. The most important difference between the promoted URLs and this result block that promotes results is those URLs here are hard-coded URLs. I have defined to display this URL here, and it is hard-coded into the query rule. Therefore, it is not security trimmed. Everyone who sees this page and enters this query will see those promoted items on the top of here. In the result block, however, people are seeing only results they would see anyway, somewhere in the result set. We just boost them up to the top of the result set. So for example, in this case, I have created my query rule to boost up the 2 most relevant PDF files here. And the third one that is happening here is I have modified the query to include content freshness. Quickly, I'm going to show you those query rules in the end of the presentation if I do have time. I'm getting some questions and I can see them. Let me answer them at the end of the session. So those are the query rules. You can do three things with them. The first one is promoting hard-coded URLs like banners. The second one is boosting up results into result blocks on the top of the search result set, and those results would be displayed anyway. Third, you can modify the query itself by adding additional expressions or adding X-rank expressions which modify how the items are sorted, and those can be very useful to enhance the search experience. The last thing I would like to show you, and what most of my customers do, is to create custom display templates. Some display templates are simple and easy and just display some additional properties on the search results here. Some of them are much more customized. So for example, if I click on the documents here, I am using a result source that displays only documents. Second, besides this filter, as I said, result sources are basically filters. Besides this, I use a custom display template here. This custom display template doesn't display the items in the classic 10 blue line search experience. Rather, it displays them in a grid, and my customers like to call it dev-like experience, especially if they are on-premises only. It can be even responsible, so if I scroll, if I modify the resolution, you can see that I have more or less items displayed in one row. It displays properties like last modified or modified by, and also the site where this item is stored. And also it is quite visual because it displays the icon of the document, and therefore people immediately see what is a Word document, what is an Excel file, what is a PDF, etc., etc. And of course, you can display any metadata, any property here that you do have in the search index. And this is going to be our next topic. If you are interested in this display template, basically it is quite easy to implement. But if you want to get it, if you want to see it, you can find it under my website, searchexplained.com/tag/display template, and you will find this one. You will find one that is available for tasks, displaying status informations about tasks, and you will find many more information about display templates there. Everything is free, so just go there and enjoy. Of course, if you do have any questions, the steps, how to apply them are included, but if you do have any questions, just shoot an email to me and I'm happy to help. So now let's focus on metadata. I have been emphasizing that everything is based on metadata in search, even on the out-of-the-box user experience. Refiners are metadata. What we displayed on the results set is metadata. What is displayed here on the hover panel or the title of the item, everything is metadata. In the queries, we can use metadata. In query rules, we use metadata. In result sources, we use metadata. So metadata is used quite everywhere in search. Especially if you want to customize your search, you have to have good quality metadata to be able to do that. So this is why I cannot emphasize enough that metadata is important if you want to work with search. The two different types of metadata, the first one is content metadata. Of course, when we work with content metadata and we talk about content metadata, that means metadata that is stored in the content management system. It can be explicit, that we add directly to the content, like properties of the content, project ID, customer name, those kind of things. Or it can be implicit, that can be extracted from the content somehow. For example, the creation date, last modified date, file type, and those kind of things. Usually content metadata is changed by users, in many cases by processes, but they are basically stored in the content management system. On the other hand, we do have search metadata. Search metadata is stored in the search index. It is, of course, crawled and processed from the content management system, but it is stored in the search index. It is maintained and changed by the search engine during the indexing process. It can be read by the users and processes, but it cannot be modified right here. The only way to modify it is to modify it by the search engine. And this is the soul and heart of the search UI, so it is very important. If I want to talk about the metadata and the search metadata any further, I have to mention that we do have two levels, two types of search metadata. The first one is crawled properties. Crawled properties are the ones that can be extracted from the content source, from the content metadata, and it is extracted during the crawl, but the crawled property value itself is not stored anywhere. It's not stored in the search index. Only the definitions are extracted. What can be used? It's like a menu. The managed properties are the properties that we do have control over. We create them, we map them to the crawled properties, and later the values can be stored. And I'm saying later because the values will be filled after first we create the managed property in the search schema, and then we do a full crawl. Because as soon as we create them for the first, we do have the definition, but we don't have any value stored in the search index yet, so we do have to do a full crawl. And it is also true whenever you change a managed property, you have to do a full crawl afterwards. It is also important to talk about unifying metadata in search. For example, just imagine you store information about projects. You store project name, probably customers, people involved, and also an ID for the project. But in different content sources, or even on different sites and site collections, that property can have different names. On different document libraries, people can create a project ID property with different names, with different column names. It can be project ID, it can be project underscore ID, it can be project MBR, it can be project NO, project number. You get the point. When we crawl that content, those columns and those metadata properties will be separate crawled properties. And it is really important because in this case we do have at least 4 different crawled properties. When we want to display this property, if we want to use it as a refiner, or if we want to use it to sort by, it is confusing for the users. Definitely we don't want to have 4 different refiners for the same property. Therefore, we create only one managed property called project number, for example, and we map each of those crawled properties to this project number managed property. So we end up having one managed property, collecting the values from each of those crawled properties, and storing them in the search index as one property, project number. And from this point, we can use it as a refiner. We can display it on the user interface in a unified way. Your users will see that the project number is this and that, regardless of the name of this column in the proper document library or in the proper site. It is very important to think about this and to plan for this in advance. Otherwise, you end up missing some properties when you need it. The next topic to talk about is content sources. What content to include into search and how to decide what to include. On premises, the picture is quite simple. We do have some type of content sources that can be added to search out of the box because we do have the out-of-the-box connectors for them. Those are SharePoint, file shares, websites, Exchange public folders, and we can create custom connections by BCS, Business Connectivity Service, and also by creating custom connectors. In the cloud, in Office 365, we do have SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. What if we want to add on-prem content to cloud search? And the answer is hybrid. With hybrid search, we are able to add on-prem content to the cloud index regardless of its type on-prem. And then we will have a unified search experience for everything, for file shares, for websites, Exchange public folders, everything. How it works? In hybrid search, we create, the content is on premises in this case, because if the content is in the cloud, if it's SharePoint Online, it's an easy thing. It is crawled anyway and it is findable anyway. So if the content is on premises, you create a cloud SSA, a cloud search service application on premises. And this cloud search service application will be able to crawl the on-prem content and send it to the cloud search index. It is important to mention that even most of the content processing happens in the cloud. So therefore you don't need resources for that. The only thing you need resources is to be able to crawl the content into the cloud SSA. And then it's sent to the cloud search index. As soon as it is in the cloud search index, it will be findable from the cloud search centers that you do have in SharePoint Online, or on premises as well. If you do have, and if you still use a SharePoint form on premises, it can be connected to the Cloud Index, therefore it can provide the results from this Cloud Index. And this way you can send to the cloud your file share content, your on-prem HR system content, SAP content, whatever you want. The only thing, you have to be able to connect to that content source and crawl that by a Cloud SSA. Cloud SSA can be created in SharePoint 2016 and also in SharePoint 2013. So it's quite available everywhere. When you are planning for this and when you are planning for your content sources, your plan has to contain many different things about the content sources. You have to create a name, or you have to define a name for your content source, a type. What type is it? Where it is located? Who is the owner? It is important to identify the content owner because you have to talk to them when you analyze the content, when you create the content inventory, when you try to figure out the volume of the content, etc., etc. And last but not least, you have to also define the crawl schedule, how often you want to crawl that content source. And in the end, you are going to have a big table again with all that information, that it is a very, very important part of the search strategy planning. And also, if you define different phases in your search strategy, it is important to add to this plan which content source should be added to search and when. Because most probably you are not adding everything at the beginning, but you are starting with 2 or 3 of them, and you are adding more and more and more later. So you have to also identify the phases when they will be added to search. So if you think in long term, basically the order of everything is a little bit different, because when you define your search term strategy, you have time enough, and most probably you also have resources enough to not to focus on the short-term quick wins, but to focus on the long-term wins. And in this case, the first to identify is the content sources, what content sources and what systems you want to add to search. Second is the metadata. What metadata you do have in that content source, and what metadata is useful from search and findability perspective. And last but not least, how you want to present everything on the user interface and how you want to display those properties, what kind of refiners you want to have from those properties, etc., etc. So you can see, if you think in long term, the order of these steps and these considerations is a little bit different, because when you focus on short term, the fastest win and the quickest one can be if you focus on the UI customization first, because this is visible for the users. Then you add new metadata, then you add new content sources. So the order is the opposite. If you think in long term, the order is quite different. Last but not least, let me focus on how to analyze the success of search and how to measure it. Basically, the search quality can be defined by many, many different metrics. So first you have to identify what metrics you want to use in your organization, who want to do this analysis, and who is responsible to do this analysis, how often, if you want to do it each month, every second month, once in a quarter. It's really up to you. It really depends on your business and your organization and your culture and many different things, but you have to have a plan for it. You have to do it on a regular basis. Otherwise, if it's nobody's responsibility, nobody will do that. And last but not least, you have to have a plan what to do with the results of this analysis and how to use them to enhance search in the next phase. And just to show you some examples, and once again, it could be a separate topic for a whole webinar itself, or even for a whole workshop itself. But just to show you some examples, what kind of quality metrics you can use and how you can measure the success of search. Number of searches, how many searches your users do in a week or in a month. The number of successful searches, the number of searches with 0 results. It is very important to talk about the 0 result searches because they show interest, they show your users have interest in something that is not included in search yet. So it might be a good point to start the next improvement, the next enhancement by adding content that is response to those 0 result searches. Results with no click. Which are the results where your users don't click at all? Why they abandon it? Most popular queries, results click the most, who is performing the most searches, users, departments, roles, correlated searches or related searches, they are also called this way. Of course, the speed and performance and latency of search and queries is important. Total distinct search terms, total distinct words, trends, historical charts and data, everything. Each of them can be a metric of success. Some of them can be extracted and generated by the out-of-the-box search analytics reporting tool, or you can purchase a third-party one, or you can develop your own. The most important thing is to define those metrics and to define the responsibilities as well. Basically, this is what I wanted to share with you today. I hope I could provide useful information. And I can see that we do have a couple of questions. If you still want to submit yours, you can do that down there in the Q&A box. So now I am going to open them and answer them one by one. John asked, can query suggestions match on a word in the middle of a phrase? Let me show you that. Let me go back here just for John and everyone who is interested. And you see when I start typing marketing, I get suggestions that begins with marketing. But to give you an idea what suggestions I do have in this environment, for example, I do have marketing reports. So if I start typing reports, you can see I get marketing reports and also sales reports. So basically, those can be matches in the middle of a phrase, but at the beginning of a word, right? So I hope this is an answer to your question, John. How does one implement search suggestions? Question from Tom. Tom, the answer for this is basically those search suggestions, you can enter them into a simple text file. If you want, let me log in as an administrator, and I really hope that I really hope that the speed will be good enough, and I can show it to you. It is in Office 365, so I'm going to show it to you here. In SharePoint on-premises, you can do the same. If you go to Central Administration, your search service application, and down there on the left side menu, you will see a Query Suggestions menu. You click on that, and you will be exactly at the same page as I am going to show it here. So in Office 365, if you are an administrator, you have to go to the SharePoint Administration Center. And in the SharePoint Administration Center, under Search, you see the Query Suggestion settings, and there you can import or export the current suggestions list into a text format, or import the query suggestion list, the same text format as you get when you export it. If it's fast enough, I can show it to you, but it looks like quite slow. But once again, you have to go to the SharePoint Admin Center in Office 365, to the search settings, and under that to the query suggestion settings. If you are on premises, you have to go to the Central Administration, search service application, and query suggestion settings there. Tom's second question, how does one implement number of results? Basically, the number of results is, I guess, and this is just a guess, you ask for the number of the item counts on the refiners. It can be done by modifying the refinement display template. You can find the steps on my blog, but basically what you have to do is you go to the display template, and the display template gallery under the master page gallery, and you go to the filters subfolder. In the filters subfolder, you will find the refiner filters, and each refiner filters has a property. When you open it for editing, you will see that each of them has a property called show counts, and the only thing you have to change is to its default value is false, and you have to set it to true. You can find the steps on my blog. Unfortunately, I don't have those display templates opened right now, and it takes a few minutes to get there. But basically, you open up the refiners display any of the refiner display templates, the default one, or you create your custom. The most important thing is to change the show counts property from false to true. And this is which one is responsible to display the item counts. One question from John again. How many CRUD properties can be mapped to a single managed property? Actually, I haven't bumped into any limitations on it. It can be many enough. If there is any, I haven't seen any limitations. If there is any, I am not aware of. I am going to do a research on it, and I'm going to email you the response. I mean, to everyone who is registered for this webinar. Tom's questions again. Are there vendors that sell commonly needed display templates? I'm not aware of. There are some people who blog about it, who uploads very nice display templates, like Matthew McDermott, sometimes Mikael Svensson, but I don't know about any vendor who is specialized to it. Teresa's question, can you return search results in a filterable table format? I am not sure what you mean in a filterable table format, Teresa, but basically, let me switch to the documents here and search for something that do have results. For example, marketing. So basically here you can see the results as cards. This also can be a table. I have had a customer who wanted to have the results in almost the same format as they see in a document library. Basically, and the easiest way to implement filters here is to add them as refiners, because basically those are filters. So if I click on PDF here, I get the results PDFs here. And by the way, one confusion that might be confusing here, when I click here, I can see 11 PDF files are in the result set, and here I can see only 4. The reason is the file duplicates are removed out of the box. So I do have PDFs that are stored more than 1 times, and those are considered to be duplicates, and they are not displayed out of the box. I can turn it on or turn it off. This is one reason of the confusion on this user interface. But back to your question, basically it is very easy to implement those filters as refiners. It is easy to implement a document library like display of the results. And of course you can mix the two experiences together. One more question from Tom. You said a new managed property will not be of value until a full crawl has completed. Yes, this is right. Does that mean that a continuous or incremental crawl will never capture and connect crawl properties to a new managed property? The point is, let me. All right, so let me try to explain without drawing anything. I like drawing, but anyway. So basically, when you create a managed property in the search schema, just imagine that you create a new property on a registry. Imagine your search index as the catalog in a library. And when you create a new managed property, you add the new property to that catalog. When you do an incremental crawl, that means, or continuous crawl, that means only the items will be crawled that have been changed since the last crawl. So if there is an item that have been changed, it will be crawled during an incremental, and in this case, the property, the new property of this item will be filled with value, right? If there is an item that has not been changed in this, since the last crawl, but has a value for this property won't be filled in with value from this item because this item is not crawled. This is why we need a full crawl. If you are in Office 365 or in SharePoint, you can basically ask to recrawl a document library or a site. And in this case, of course, those items, new property will be added to the search index, but only for those. But if you know that only on a site or only on a specific document library you do have this new property that you have just added to the search index, in this case it's more than enough. We usually say that a full crawl is needed just to make sure that each property will have an updated each item will have an updated properties on the search index after the schema is modified. But if you can define a subset of items and you are sure that only that subset of items has that property in the source system, then it's enough to crawl that subset and you don't have to crawl everything else. The last question I can see at the moment is, you did not talk about dev today. Well, it was intentional. The reason for it is that because we cannot really customize dev. Therefore, I decided not to talk about dev, but talk more about customizations and how it can be used alone and with FAST. Can you talk about this a bit? Well, I am not sure what you mean to use dev with FAST, but basically, if you want to use dev alone, dev is more for discovery and not really for enterprise search. You cannot really customize it. You cannot define refiners. You cannot define how the items are displayed there. It is definitely personalized. So in the classic search experience that we use here, that we call enterprise search in SharePoint Online and also in on-premises, the users pull the results. Dev pushes the results to you. It helps you to discover. It also has, of course, it also has a search feature, but it is quite different. I decided not to talk about dev today because of this reason. We cannot really customize it. It is very valuable. As you know, if you know me, I love working with Office Graph. I love working with dev. I love talking about it. It was just not enough time to add this into this webinar today. Yes, today. All right. At the moment, I cannot see any further questions. So I really would like to say thank you for joining me today for this webinar. This webinar has been recorded. As soon as it is processed, I am going to email everyone the information how you can get it, and also all the URLs and all the additional information that I have provided and we have discussed today. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope to see you somewhere very soon. Bye-bye.